focus on what matters.
Welcome to our final Axios Latino event of the year, titled Honoring Veteran Services and Sacrifice as we commemorate Veterans Day this year. I'm Russell Contreras, the race and justice reporter for Axios, and I'm coming at you from Rio Rancho, New Mexico. And welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and use the hashtag AxiosEvents. Over the next 30 minutes, we will spotlight ways to commemorate the contributions of fallen heroes and discuss the importance of public policy that supports Latino veterans after they have honorably served. Our first guest is the Congressman from Arizona, Representative Ruben Gallego. Joining us from Phoenix, Representative Gallego, is a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started on issues today, you are the product of an immigrant from Mexico and an immigrant from Colombia, and you decided that you wanted to join the Marines. Take us back. What was that conversation like when you informed your family of your plans?
Well, I think my mom wasn't too surprised. She knew that I always wanted to do military service. We're a very patriotic family. I always felt at some point I was supposed to repay my country for everything they had given us, as immigrants. And what happened is I actually ended up having something bad happen, which is I got kicked out of Harvard, and I had some time off from Harvard before I could even reapply. And I decided to use that time to join Marine Corps Reserves. And my goal was just simple service. It was pre 9/11. Didn't think it was, I would find myself in combat. Certainly not in the combat I eventually found myself in. But also, of course, if it happened, I wasn't going to, not do my part. But my mom was very understanding. Of course, she was scared for me. A lot of people thought I shouldn't do it, but it was the right thing to do.
In the Marines, you found yourself in the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, part of a company called Lucky Lima. And you guys saw some of the most fierce action in Iraq. Take us back to that moment when you were part of these group of men and you were fighting. What happened to this outfit?
Well, this outfit was a group of men from New Mexico. So a lot of Native Americans, a lot of Latinos or Hispanics, they call themselves in New Mexico, Chicanos, immigrants. And then we joined up with a lot of men from Ohio, largely white men. So it was actually a really good, cultural mix. We taught them a lot about, food and introduced them to green chili, which they still eat to this day. But, we were put in an area that was very restive. This is post-Fallujah. A lot of the insurgents fled into this area, and we were in charge of basically taking care of an area the size of West Virginia that ran all the way to the Iraq border. And basically, we were outnumbered for the missions that we needed. We didn't have enough men. We didn't have enough armor. And after months of sustained combat without no casualties, we just started dying. And I lost so many friends. It was a heartbreaking tour of duty that really has changed me for the rest of my life, and really gives me a good appreciation for what men and women have to deal with both in war and coming back from war.
Now, this week, you released a memoir, They Call Us Lucky, The Life and Afterlife of Iraq's War's Hardest Hit Unit. This is something that you were very honest with. You did not sugarcoat your experience. But the theme is that you didn't make this by skill or God or training. You made it by luck. Explain what you mean.
Well, look, and by my count, probably more, I survived death 11 different times. And it was just sheer luck that someone didn't hit me, that an IED didn't hit me, that I didn't go into the right house, or the house ended up getting, people getting ambushed in, all these things. And the reason I want to bring that up is because I think a lot of books, especially war books, glorify war and show these, amazing heroes and men that do these things. But in reality, a lot of times you could do everything right and you will still die. You could do everything wrong and you will still live. And that's just the chaos of war. And I want people to understand that there is no rationale to war. There is nothing that actually makes sense. And if you're a young man like I was, and there was even younger men when I was there, we were trying to make sense of everything that was going on and just trying to, do our jobs and keep ourselves alive. But I wanted the reader to actually understand that, to feel what we felt, and not really. This is not a book to glorify war. It's a book to remember the men that served there and what they had to do to survive, for those that did.
Now, in this book, you were very honest about how you got here, and it's really telling. Because right now, back in 1972, 3 out of every 4 members of Congress had some sort of military service. Today, it's 1 of every 6 members of Congress. What are we losing when we don't have the same amount of military experience making our laws, our federal laws?
Well, you're losing on the ground experience. And I think one of the things that I'm able to bring is I actually bring the perspective of an enlisted man versus a lot of officers and high ranking officers that end up running in the military. So I know how it is to get paid $1,000 a month. I know how it is to try to live off $1,000 a month. I also know how it is to take orders, not give orders, and the responsibility that comes all with that. But also, the less people you have in the military that serve in Congress, the less people you have to keep the Department of Defense in check. And at times, I've seen members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, be way too deferential to the Department of Defense, to generals. Not calling into question things that really should be called into question. They should be part of our oversight. And it's to the detriment of the men and women in the military. I mean, this is how you end up in 20-year wars, because there was just not enough people that were willing to say to some of these generals that you see on TV all the time, "You're wrong. It's time to leave."
Now, you've been outspoken as a member of Congress that the federal government needs to really consider how it deports immigrants who served in the armed forces, whether it was in Vietnam or Iraq. Why is that such an important issue for you?
Because we gave a sacred bond and trust to these men, and many of them are getting deported because of PTSD. A lot of them came back and self-medicated themselves because the VA wasn't ready to accept them, and they were legal permanent residents that we didn't help get their citizenship, and then we send them overseas where they have, by the way, VA benefits, but there is no VA in Mexico, and the only VA benefit they actually end up receiving at the end of the day is one thing: is that they get to get buried back in the United States. And time and time again, you'll see flag-draped coffins crossing the border of veterans that get to be buried in U.S. cemeteries. In the meantime, we kicked them out, and sometimes for things that are just really non-threatening, drug possession, DUIs, things that we normally would give other people grace. We send people to countries that they haven't been to in years. Some of them don't even speak the language.
This Veterans Day, many Hispanic families will remember names like Macario Garcia or Felix Longoria. These were names that were people who served in the military and came back and became symbols of the civil rights movement. Yet these people don't don the names of our military bases, while some former Confederates do. Do you support changing the names of some of these bases and to honor some of these Latino heroes?
I do. I've been there to insert the language into the NDA a couple of times. I've been working with another Marine, Salud Carvajal, in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and also on Armed Services Committee, to recommend names to changing the names of these bases that are named after traitors to this country, white supremacists. And the military is growing more and more diverse, especially when it comes to combat arms, and especially when it comes to Latinos in the military. We need to have some type of base that's named after Latino heroes, so that way they have someone to look up to, someone they know that this is an accepting military that's going to take care of them while they take care of the country.
Now, as someone who served in the military and someone who keeps a hawk eye on the Department of Defense, if a young Latino came to you today, Latino, and they ask, should I consider serving my country in the military, Marines, Air Force, so forth, what would you tell them?
I tell them yes. You're never going to regret service to your country, but make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. Make sure you know that you may find yourself in combat, or you may find yourself being pulled away from your family. But there's nothing better you can do than to serve in your country. Especially for someone like me, son of immigrants. if I had grown up in one of my home countries, there's no way I would make it as far as I have now. And I owe it to this country, and I owe it to them through my service, and I'm proud to have done it.
In our final 30 seconds or so we have left, I would be remiss if I didn't ask this. You live in the state of Arizona. You are a Democrat. There are 2 Democrats in the U.S. Senate. You ever thought about running for Senate later on?
Well, of course, every politician thinks about it. I've thought about it in the past too. But what I'm thinking about right now is, getting the 2022 budget reconciliation done, winning 22, keeping the House, and then we'll worry about the future in the future. But I love where I am right now, and I just want to make sure that we land build that better budget, and keep our House majority.
Congressman Gallego from Phoenix, thank you for joining us. We really enjoyed having you.
Muchas gracias.
And next, we have a video from Bank of America, the sponsor of this event.
Some soldiers come back with wounds you can see, but many of us come back with wounds you can't see. I retired from the military in 2012. I spent 39 months deployed, and that surrealness of being in a combat zone, coming back into the civilian world was tough. A lot of dark years fighting off PTSD, and I had to really go outside of the scope, and I had to struggle with this notion of who I was, who I could be. Let me show you what I do to get rid of those demons. It really just started out as a hobby in the basement, making clothes for my wife. And we got a tremendous response. My first runway was spring of 2017 for Denver Fashion Week, and it's exploded since then. We are now focused on what we need to do as a small business and growing that into something global.
Small businesses are the majority of businesses in Denver and in Colorado and nationwide. And a lot of veterans are starting up small businesses. We're one of the largest lenders to CDFIs, community development financial institutions in the country. And we partner with CDFIs like Colorado Enterprise Fund on our veteran entrepreneur lending program to connect veterans with affordable capital to help kickstart and grow their businesses.
Soldiers don't become fashion designers generally, but Bank of America was the one from the beginning that says, hey, we believe in what you're doing, and we've created a program just for you. Let me connect you with the Colorado Enterprise Fund.
Not only is he able to get that access to capital, but we also provide a training program and a mentoring program to help him get to the next level.
It's really about, we really want you to succeed. And they've been supportive ever since. They've attended the shows. They're really a part of the journey.
It's really wonderful to see Dwayne be able to have his business just take off.
That's the fun part about my job, meeting passionate business owners like Dwayne, and we can't wait to see where Dwayne takes his business and his career.
You know what, I've had a rough journey. I've overcome some obstacles, but I love what I do now. You have the power to choose your path. You have the power to choose who you are, and you have the power to find your own switch. Turn that light on and shine.
Our final guest is an author and board member of the Hispanic Veterans Leadership Alliance, retired Air Force Colonel Lisa Carrington Firmin. She is joining us from San Antonio, Texas. Colonel Firmin, it is a pleasure and honor. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Russ. I appreciate it.
Before we get into the work you're doing today and your upcoming book, take us back to growing up in South Texas in the Valley. Your father was in the Air Force. How did he influence you or encourage you to take up a career in military service?
Well, my father, I think like a lot of good Latinos, lead by example. And he certainly did, so did my mother. My father was actually in the Navy first, and then he got out of the Navy and went into the Air Force and spent an entire career in the Air Force. But I would say that my father and my mother both led by example through their acts of service and putting others first. So I always knew that service was in our DNA, I would say, in our family's DNA. My brother also served in he served in the Army. But I was the first person in the family to as a woman, first woman to serve in the military.
When you joined the Air Force, it was very clear that as a Latina, as a female, this is a different world. And you went all across the world on assignments, but when you came to New Mexico, someone asked you a question that kind of shook your core. What did they ask you, and how did you respond to it?
That was my first assignment after finishing officer training school. I had gone to college. The Veterans Administration, Veterans Affairs had paid for my education. So I came into the military after college as an officer and went to training school. And then I ended up in my first assignment in New Mexico. And my first assignment was a fighter squadron, which is a heavily male, dominated career field, especially back then, because women were not allowed to be fighter pilots at that time. And I was the first woman assigned to that unit. And like a lot of women, back in those days, and even somewhat to today, is still currently true. I was asked if I was, I'll be frank, and please excuse your audience, please excuse sometimes the language that the suspects use to describe certain situations, but I was asked if I was a bitch or a whore.
And how did you respond to that? Was it something that angered you, or did you say, I have to go with this? This is environment. I got to deal with it. What was your reaction?
Well, of course, I didn't appreciate the question. My goodness, no one asked the males in the unit that same question, and no men were welcome that way. But again, there weren't that many women at all, and I think part of it was just trying to put me on kind of on my toes and to see how I'd react. To see if I would complain or whatever. I chose to be a bitch because I certainly didn't want to be considered a whore. But I argued about why I even got asked the question. I think is irrelevant. What you should be looking at is my work and judge me on my merit. So I tried to steer the conversation every time things came up about my gender or my ethnicity to right back to my competence and to what I contributed to the mission.
You move up the ranks, and again, there were fewer Latinas as you move up, and eventually you become the only one of the highest ranking in the country's history. How did you look at those below you, those you were supervising, other Latinas in there? They obviously saw you as a role model, but what did you see? How did you see your relationship to them in military?
Well, the first time someone came up to me, a young Latina, a young enlisted Latina came up to me, and this was even before I pinned on full colonel. She told me that, and she was a very sharp Latina. She was in the honor guard, the color guard, so she was in front of a lot of people, and you don't get those kind of special duties unless you handle yourself properly. So she was really sharp. But she said, ma'am, I was going to get out of the Air Force. I was thinking about getting out. I just didn't see a future. But now that I see you, I see the fact that you've achieved the rank that you have. There may be hope for me, and I can stay in, and I can try to climb that ladder and get a little higher ranked myself. So I realized, and this was an assignment I had in North Dakota at the time. I realized that I was a role model, and that not only were people watching me to see if I succeeded or not, but people were watching me. And I guess even silently rooting for me to do well. And those were my fellow hermanas, because and Latinos in the service. So she made a real difference to me how I carried myself.
Now, this April, you'll be coming out with a book called Stories from the Front, Pain, Betrayal, and Resilience on the MST Battlefield. And MST, of course, refers to military sexual trauma. Now that you've been away and you're re-looking back in your career, what have you come to terms with in what you saw with MST and how you saw women being treated in the military?
Yeah, a lot of the way I was treated personally, and I know a lot of my fellow women and men too, to a certain extent, how we were treated, I've had more time to reflect on it more recently now that I'm out of the service. And then we had a whole year of this COVID, the pandemic, to kind of be hunkered down. And it offered me time to reflect on what I had experienced. I realized I always believed that it was underreported because I myself never reported anything. I just, again, like I told you earlier, Russ, I just kept trying to prove myself through my competency and prove that women could lead, prove that Latinas could lead at all levels. So, but I noticed that more and more people were coming forward and letting me know their stories and telling me about it. I wrote an op-ed about military sexual trauma. It was the first time I've ever spoken up about it. I had never spoken negatively about my service. I would briefly say that I did experience some harassment, but I never really spoke in detail about that harassment or hazing that I experienced early on in my career. But after the horrific murder of Vanessa Guillen is when I started to reflect more, have more memories, and remember. And then I started writing. And the first thing I wrote was an op-ed about it. And the response to that op-ed is why I decided to write the book.
Now, for us who have not served in the military, one could say, why even join? If this is the environment one faces, why put yourself through it? You have a different perspective. It's saying, no, why don't you reform the environment for the military? Not why should we put the decision on us? Why is that important that we reform the military, especially those who want to serve regardless of those conditions?
Yeah, well, I think that, if no one served, then who would protect our country, right? So I think we do need people to serve, and more Americans are not even qualified to serve for medical reasons, for physical reasons, for several different reasons. So it's important that the few of us that serve do serve, but we need to be safe while we serve, and that's important too. And the culture needs to change with the times. The culture needs to the leadership of the military should reflect the people that they serve and the people that they're leading. And that's one of the reasons I got involved with Hispanic Veterans Leadership Alliance, because I've been writing and speaking and researching about the lack of Latinos, Latinx, or Hispanics at the very highest ranks in the military. Because every time I got promoted, I'd look around the room and there was less and less and less people who, were like me. So it was important to me to basically call them out on it and do research on it. And I was researching this as early as 2002.
We know through the military's numbers that the number of Latinos, the percentage of Latinos in the Marines, Navy, Air Force has increased dramatically over the past 2 decades. What do we lose when we don't have high-ranking Latino officers in our branches of the military?
Well, I think you lose perspective. I mean, there's a separation between those that are leading and those that are the followers, so to speak, in the military. You lose perspective. You don't understand what they've been through, what they're going through. You lack of role models. I never worked for a woman until I had been in the service 18 years at the Pentagon. And I had never, ever worked for a Latino or Hispanic officer. So I think that's important, because the people coming up in the ranks need to see themselves in the leadership. And, I never saw that. And it is really hard, Russ, to be what you cannot see, to aspire, to dream, to have the ganas to go on, right? So I think that's important. It's important that the leadership does represent and resemble those that they're leading. They have more perspective, they have more insight, more diversity. And the business case for diversity has been done out there for years about what it brings to the mission, right?
And Carrington Firmin, for the last 30 seconds or so, if I'm a young Latino considering the military today, what would you tell me?
I would tell you to make a very informed decision before you would join. I would tell you to talk to mi gente, talk to the relatives that served already, read up as much as you can. And then I would ask those hard questions of your recruiters. Tell me, how many Latinos are in the leadership positions? What career fields have more? What is your branch doing about inclusion, not just diversity? Inclusion, really letting people be valued and having their opinions heard at the table and making decisions. So I would ask those questions. And then I would really talk to people who serve right now and ask them what they think. And I think from all that, once you have all that information, become educated, and then you make your informed decision.
Colonel Firmin, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Russ. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for joining us this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. For more information or to sign up for our Axios Latino newsletter, visit axios.com/newsletters or go to our Axios app. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you on axios.com.